There's one idea that has been really impactful in my life, more than most of the ideas that I've encountered. And that really says a lot because I deal in ideas. It's my stock in trade. And the idea first was presented to me in the form of a quote. And the quote said, "Those who are successful in the end will be those whose success is the result of steady accretion." And it's that last word, accretion, that really took hold of me. So at the time, I didn't know what it meant, and I looked it up. And accretion just means growth or increase through the gradual accumulation of additional layers. Now, we see accretion in nature in many different forms. It's quite well known in astrophysics to be part of how stars and planets form in certain ways. But the way that it impacted me was to think about the decisions and the actions that we accumulate through our lives and how that ends up really impacting the outcomes that we have, the life that we create, the business that we create. And so over the years, it's become something that I really think about all the time. Now, the thing about accretion is you can't stop it, you can't sidestep it. It's a law of nature. It's operating in the background whether you want it to be there or not. And so the best that we can really do is to figure out how to make the best of it. And I found that there are three things that you need to keep in mind to do that. The first is to remember that accretion has no bias. So it doesn't care what you feed into this process. It just accumulates and then it gives it back to you. And I often use Ingvar Kamprad and Pablo Escobar as examples of this. So they both reached incredible heights in their respective fields. Ingvar Kamprad was the founder of IKEA, but what many people don't know is that he started off his career at the age of 5, selling matches to friends and family. Then eventually at 7, he got a bicycle, and so he could cycle further. His distribution network increased. Eventually, he would go on to sell more than just matches. He would sell ballpoint pens and pencils and all kinds of things. At the age of 17, he starts IKEA. A few years later, he starts dabbling in furniture. And eventually, at the height of IKEA and 3 years before Ingvar's death, he was the 8th richest person in the world. So accretion throughout his entire life. And the same can be said for Pablo Escobar. You know, Pablo was the king of cocaine, but it didn't start there. He started off his life in crime, stealing tombstones and then sanding them down and then reselling them. Eventually, he would get into kidnappings and carjackings, and 10 years later, he gets into the cocaine trade and then eventually becomes the king of cocaine. So for both of these men, it shows how accretion was present throughout their entire lives and through them building their empires, but one did it in the most positive way possible and the other obviously in a very destructive way. But the process isn't biased. It just takes what you give it and gives it back to you. It only focuses on the accumulation. So be careful, be intentional about what you put into the process. The second thing is that misses don't matter as much when you think of accretion. You know, we can be very hard on ourselves if we aren't as consistent as we need to be. And yes, obviously consistency is important because we are talking about the accumulation of things. So we need to be able to put in the reps so they can accumulate. But what that also means is if you zoom out a bit, when you miss a day or two, it's not the biggest deal. You know, eating one healthy meal doesn't make you healthy. Eating one unhealthy meal doesn't make you unhealthy. It is about what you do most of the time. And so I think it just gives us permission to not be as tough on ourselves when we have those misses. And then the third, which I think is maybe the most important aspect for me of this, is that it teaches us to be patient. That when you don't have the outcomes that you want to have right now, what you can just focus on instead is the process. What you can just focus on instead is, am I accumulating and putting into this process the right kind of decisions and the right kind of actions? Because if I do that, because this is a law of nature, it is inevitable that I will have my outcome. Like, it will present to you at some point in time, but you don't always get to control when that is. All you can control is what you put into the process. What are you accumulating? We can even talk about this in the context of artificial intelligence. You know, are you accumulating small learnings every single day? Are you trying out small experiments that over the course of a year will lead to you having reinvented yourself and reinvented your business and reinvented your skill set? Or are you accumulating nothing? Are you turning a blind eye to the changes that are happening around you because it's scary and overwhelming, and therefore you decide to rather just do nothing? And of course, that just gets accumulated. And this is a great way of thinking about it, because if you have two people, one who does something small every single day and one who does nothing, over the course of a week, the difference between those two in terms of the value they add to the world or the skill set they have doesn't change all that much. Over the course of a quarter, you're starting to see some really significant changes. But over the course of a year, one person is completely different, completely reinvented, adding a lot more value, and the other person is completely stagnated. And so even the smallest actions matter when you think of accretion. You don't have to take big action. You just need to take small but consistent action, knowing that that will ultimately change how you think, how you feel, how you behave, and that will ultimately give you a new outcome. That's ultimately how we reinvent ourselves over time as well. On the whiteboard behind the camera, I write down all the things that are important to me that I want to remember. And one of the maxims that I've written down is not one thing, many small things. And it's just this reminder that we often try and find that silver bullet, that one thing that's going to move the needle. And usually it's not that one thing. Usually it's not one big thing, it's many small things. And so the moment I remember that, I'm like, okay, cool. Now I can go back to figuring out what those small things are. I do them and I know that they will accumulate. So remember that those who are successful in the end will be those whose success is the result of steady accretion.